My wife prepared breakfast, and right after my daughter and I ate, we collapsed. As I pretended to be unconscious, I heard her on the phone saying, "Finally, it is done, and we will soon be together." She was talking to her lover. "Hi, thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us." If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel and comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today, our special shout out goes to James Lewis from Arizona. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. I always believed that betrayal was something that happened to other people, something you read about in books or watched in crime dramas. But on that morning, in the comfort of my own home, with the woman I had loved for over a decade standing before me, I learned that deception can wear the most familiar face. The day started like any other. I woke up to the scent of coffee drifting through the house, mingling with the faint aroma of bacon sizzling on the stove. Sunlight poured through the bedroom window, casting warm, golden streaks across the hardwood floor. For a brief moment, I lay there, listening to the quiet sounds of morning, the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall, the faint hum of birds outside, and the soft, cheerful chatter of my wife and daughter in the kitchen. Melissa had always been an early riser, and she took pride in making breakfast for the family. It was one of the things I loved about her, the way she made the ordinary feel special. I stretched, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and got up, eager to start another day in what I thought was our perfect life. When I walked into the kitchen, Melissa turned and smiled, her brown eyes warm and inviting. She looked beautiful, as always, her dark hair tied back neatly, wearing that familiar blue apron she loved so much. She was flipping pancakes, humming to herself, while Lily sat at the table swinging her little legs, eagerly waiting for her plate. "Morning, sleepyhead," Melissa teased, handing me a steaming cup of coffee. I kissed her on the cheek before ruffling Lily's curls. "Morning, ladies. What's the occasion? This is quite the feast." "No occasion," Melissa said with a playful shrug. "Just wanted to do something nice for my two favorite people." I sat down across from Lily as Melissa placed plates of pancakes, bacon, and eggs in front of us. It smelled incredible, and I dug in, savoring the rich flavors. Lily giggled as she drizzled too much syrup onto her pancakes, and Melissa reached over, dabbing her mouth with a napkin. It was moments like this that I cherished, simple, ordinary happiness. But happiness is often a mask, hiding what lurks beneath. Halfway through my meal, a strange sensation crept over me. My fingers tingled slightly, and my limbs felt oddly heavy, as if an invisible weight were pressing down on them. I frowned, setting my fork down. Melissa's voice was distant, muffled, like I was underwater. "Everything okay, babe?" I opened my mouth to respond, but my tongue felt thick and sluggish. My vision blurred at the edges, darkening like ink spreading through water. My heartbeat slowed, my body resisting every command I gave it. Panic surged through me as I realized I couldn't lift my arms. Lily let out a soft whimper beside me. I turned my head just in time to see her small frame slump forward, her fork clattering to the floor. My daughter. Something was wrong, terribly, horribly wrong. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled beneath me, and the world tilted sideways. I collapsed onto the floor, my head hitting the cool tile with a dull thud. Pain shot through my skull, but it was nothing compared to the terror clawing at my chest. As I lay there, paralyzed and barely conscious, I heard Melissa's footsteps moving away. She wasn't rushing to my side. She wasn't crying out in panic. She was calm. And then I heard it. The sound of her voice, low and steady. She was on the phone. "It's done," she whispered, her tone eerily devoid of emotion. "We'll be together soon." If my body could have reacted, I would have flinched as though I'd been struck. "We'll be together soon." The words echoed through my mind, slicing through my confusion like a blade. Melissa had poisoned us. My wife, the woman I had built my life with, the mother of my child, had done this. And she had done it willingly. A sickening wave of dread washed over me. My mind screamed at my body to move, to do something, anything, but I was trapped inside myself, helpless. My breath came in slow, shallow gulps, my pulse sluggish. I had no idea how long I would remain conscious, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I didn't act fast, Melissa would walk away, leaving Lily and me to die. And she would never look back. I fought to keep my mind focused. Stay awake. Listen. Think. Melissa's footsteps moved toward the bedroom. I heard drawers opening, the sound of a zipper being pulled. She was packing. She was leaving. I tried to process it. Had this always been her plan? How long had she been waiting for this moment? And who the hell was she talking to? My thoughts were a tangled mess, but one thing was crystal clear. I couldn't let her get away with this. I had to survive. For Lily. For myself. For justice. I focused on the feeling in my fingers, willing them to move. A small twitch. Then another. My breaths were slow and painful, but I was regaining control. Inch by inch, I forced myself to move my hand toward my pocket, where my phone rested. My fingers barely had the strength to curl around it, but I managed to slide it out. My thumb hovered over the screen, and with every ounce of strength I had left, I pressed down on the emergency dial. 911. The phone connected. I couldn't speak. I barely had enough strength to breathe, but I kept the line open. The dispatcher's voice crackled in my ear. 911. What's your emergency? Silence on my end. But they would hear the background noises. They would hear Melissa moving, zipping up bags, rustling papers. They would send someone. I just had to hold on. As I lay there, fighting against the darkness threatening to consume me, I swore to myself that if I survived this, Melissa wouldn't get away with it. She thought she had won. She thought I was already gone. But she was wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Lying on the cold tile floor, I forced my body to remain still. My breathing was shallow, my limbs heavy as if they belonged to someone else. My head swam in a fog of nausea, but I couldn't afford to slip into unconsciousness. Not yet. Melissa thought I was out. That was my advantage. I listened as she moved around the house, her footsteps quick and purposeful. There was no hesitation, no panic in her movements. She wasn't checking on Lily. She wasn't crying over her husband lying motionless on the floor. She was preparing to leave. A zipper ripped through the silence, a bag being packed. Drawers opened and slammed shut. The sound of papers shuffling followed. Then, I heard it. The metallic click of the safe in our bedroom. Bank documents. Passports. Valuables. She wasn't just leaving. She was erasing us. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She had planned this. Meticulously. Carefully. Maybe for weeks. Maybe for months. A cold fury settled inside me, cutting through the poison-induced haze. She thought she could take everything, my daughter, my money, my life, and walk away without a second thought. I wasn't going to let that happen. I focused on my fingers, willing them to move. A small twitch. Then another. It felt like my body was encased in cement, but I pushed through the numbness, forcing my muscles to obey. Melissa was still in the bedroom. This was my only chance. Slowly, painfully, I inched my hand toward my pocket, where my phone rested. My fingers barely had the strength to curl around it, but I managed to slide it out. I gritted my teeth, forcing my thumb onto the screen. 911. The call connected. A voice came through, distant and crackling. 911. What's your emergency? I tried to speak, but my throat was thick with poison. My lips barely moved. Help, I whispered. It was barely a breath of sound, but I prayed it was enough. The dispatcher's voice sharpened. Sir, can you repeat that? What's your location? I tried again, but my voice failed me. My fingers trembled, and the phone slipped from my grasp, landing with a soft thud beside me. Melissa's footsteps quickened. My pulse pounded in my ears as I forced myself to remain still. If she saw me awake, if she realized I had called for help, she would finish what she started. I heard her approach the kitchen. My body screamed at me to stay limp, to keep my breathing slow and shallow. She stepped closer. I could feel her presence hovering above me. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, after what felt like forever, she exhaled sharply. Good, she muttered under her breath. Good. Like she had been waiting for confirmation that I was gone. She walked away. A door creaked open, the hallway closet. I listened as she rummaged through bags, likely taking anything else of value she could find. Every second she spent looting our home was a second closer to help arriving. I just had to hold on. I tried to glance at Lily, my heart aching. She was still slumped over at the table, her tiny form eerily still. I wanted to reach for her, to make sure she was still breathing, but I couldn't risk it. Instead, I focused on the faint sound of my phone still connected. The dispatcher would be listening. They had to be. A moment later, Melissa's footsteps returned. I braced myself, keeping my face slack, my body unmoving. She hesitated. I could almost feel her staring at me. Then she knelt. A hand touched my face, light, almost gentle. For a brief, twisted moment, I thought she might be feeling remorse. But then she whispered, "It had to be this way, James. You should have seen it coming." A rush of cold fury flooded my veins. I had loved this woman, trusted her, built a life with her. And now she was standing over me like I was nothing more than an obstacle she had finally removed. I wanted to lash out, to grab her wrist and force the truth from her lips. But I couldn't. Not yet. She lingered a second longer before standing and walking away. I heard the front door unlock. She was making her exit. Then, in the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the wail of sirens. Melissa froze. I heard the sharp intake of her breath. A pause. Then the sudden rustle of her bag as she zipped it up faster, her movements turning frantic. The sirens grew louder. Melissa muttered a curse. A car door slammed outside. She was out of time. A second later, the pounding of fists on the front door rattled through the house. "Police. Open the door." For the first time, Melissa sounded panicked. I heard her breath quicken, her keys jingling as she fumbled to grab them. "Police. Open up now." The doorknob rattled. Melissa took one last, sharp breath, then, in a blur of movement, she bolted toward the back of the house. The front door burst open with a deafening crash. Heavy boots thundered across the floor. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me as voices shouted, "Freeze." Hands where we can see them. The poison was still running through my system, making my limbs feel like lead. But I didn't care. I had done it. Melissa wasn't going to get away. I forced my head to turn, my vision hazy but still clear enough to see officers swarming into the house. One of them crouched beside me. "Sir, can you hear me?" I tried to nod, but my body refused to cooperate. "It's okay, sir. We've got you. Medics are on the way." More movement. More voices. And then, through the fog of my fading consciousness, I heard Melissa's voice one last time. "No, please, a struggle. A pair of handcuffs snapping shut. And then silence. I let the darkness take me, knowing that when I woke up, I would make damn sure Melissa paid for every second of this betrayal. Melissa stood motionless in the dimly lit living room, her breath shallow, her pulse a frantic drumbeat in her ears. The silence in the house was thick, heavy. The only sound was the occasional rustling of fabric as she adjusted the strap of her bag, ensuring everything was in place. She turned her gaze toward the kitchen. James lay sprawled on the floor, his body lifeless. A part of her expected him to twitch, to groan, to show some sign that he was still in there somewhere. But he didn't. Neither did Lily. Melissa's fingers tightened around her phone. "It's done." Finally, she crouched beside James, watching his chest for any movement. Nothing. The poison had worked faster than she expected. Good. It had to be this way. Still, she needed to be sure. She leaned in closer, so close she could almost hear his heartbeat, if there was one. "You should have seen this coming," she murmured, the words barely above a whisper. James had always been predictable, too trusting, too blind. Melissa straightened and pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly over the screen. A message to the only person who mattered now. "Melissa, it's done. I'm leaving now. See you soon." She hit send, her breath catching in anticipation. The reply came almost instantly. "Unknown number. Hurry. We don't have much time." Her heart fluttered. Soon, she'd be gone. Free. Away from this suffocating life, this dead-end marriage, this house filled with lies and disappointment. She grabbed the duffel bag she had packed weeks ago, stuffed with everything she needed: money, passports, the bank documents she'd been careful to secure without James noticing. She had thought of everything, or so she believed. Then, the sirens. A cold wave of panic crashed over her. She froze, her fingers clenching around the bag's strap. The distant wail of police sirens grew louder, cutting through the quiet neighborhood. No, 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 no. This wasn't supposed to happen. Melissa's breath came faster, her mind racing. Had someone seen something? Had she left the door open? A light on? No. She had been careful. So careful. Then it hit her. James's phone. She had assumed he was unconscious. Assumed he was gone. But what if? Her stomach twisted. Melissa bolted for the kitchen, her heels clicking against the tile. James's phone lay on the floor, the screen still faintly glowing. The call log was open. 911, call ongoing. A shudder of terror ran through her. She snatched up the phone, but it was too late. A voice crackled from the speaker. Sir? Can you hear me? Help is on the way. Stay with me. Melissa's hands shook as she ended the call. Her escape plan was crumbling. Her lover's message vibrated on her phone again, but she ignored it. She had to think fast. The police were almost here. She had minutes, maybe seconds, to erase any trace of what she had done. She dashed into the kitchen, grabbing the breakfast plates and shoving them into the sink. Water ran, swirling away any lingering traces of the poison. She wiped down the counters, her hands moving in frantic circles. James's coffee mug, Lily's plate, every surface she had touched. Then, the safe. She sprinted to the bedroom, the open safe mocking her with its emptiness. Everything valuable was already in her bag, but she didn't want them finding the safe open. She yanked it shut, spun the dial, and wiped it clean. She was moving fast now, running purely on adrenaline. Melissa snatched her duffel bag and stormed toward the front door. And then, she stopped. A small, blinking light caught her attention. For the first time, she noticed it. A tiny black device, nestled inconspicuously among the books on the living room shelf. A camera. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't hers. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached for it. She pressed a button. The small screen lit up. And then, she saw it. The footage played in eerie silence. James setting up the camera, adjusting the angle, testing the lens. His face calm, his expression unreadable. Then, her. Every movement, every calculated step, every whisper. She scrolled further. There she was, pouring the poison into the coffee, glancing over her shoulder, wiping the rim of the cup, smiling as she handed it to him. Her breath hitched. James had known. He had been watching her, recording her. Her pulse thundered in her ears. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to be dead. Her lover's words flashed in her mind. Hurry. We don't have much time. No. She wasn't going to let this ruin everything. Melissa grabbed the camera, her fingers tightening around it. She had to destroy it, burn it, bury it. But before she could move, the sirens roared to a stop outside. A car door slammed. Then another. Heavy boots pounded against the pavement. A voice boomed. Police. Open the door. Melissa's mind spun. What do I do? What do I do? Then, instinct. She dropped the camera and sprinted toward the back door. Her hands fumbled with the lock, but before she could open it, a deafening crash. The front door burst open. Freeze. Hands where we can see them. Melissa's breath hitched. She turned, just in time to see the red laser of a taser gun locking onto her chest. She had lost. And as she raised her hands, her gaze flicked to James, still lying motionless on the floor. Except this time, she swore she saw a flicker of movement. A twitch of his fingers. A barely there smirk. Her stomach dropped. James Carter wasn't dead. He had played her. And now, it was over. Pain clawed at my muscles as I forced my body to respond. Every movement felt sluggish, my limbs trembling under the weight of the poison still coursing through my veins. My vision blurred, but I could make out the silhouette of Melissa, her back turned, her body tense as she fumbled with the lock on the back door. She was trying to run. Not on my watch. I braced against the counter, using every ounce of strength I had left to push myself upright. The room spun, nausea rolled through me, but I gritted my teeth and took a step forward. Then another. Going somewhere. My voice was hoarse, barely more than a rasp, but it was enough. Melissa froze. Slowly, she turned to face me. Her eyes, wide with shock, locked onto mine. For a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. Fear, disbelief. But then she masked it, schooling her expression into something colder, more controlled. You. Her voice wavered before she caught herself. You should be dead. I took another step, blocking the only exit. Yeah, I figured that was the plan. Her nostrils flared as she tightened her grip on the duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She was calculating her next move. I could see it, the gears turning in her mind, the silent war between fight or flight. James, she tried again, her voice softer now, almost affectionate. You don't understand. This isn't what it looks like. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, I think it's exactly what it looks like. My loving wife poisons me and our daughter, robs me blind, and runs off with her boyfriend? That about sum it up. Melissa's expression hardened. You were never supposed to wake up. Her words were like a blade slicing through me. I had spent years loving this woman, building a life with her. And now, she stood in front of me, unapologetic. Remorseless. Why? The word escaped before I could stop it. Was it all a lie? Everything. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Oh, don't be dramatic. We had our good moments, sure. But let's not pretend, James. Our marriage was dead long before today. I clenched my fists. So you decided to kill me instead of just leaving? Her lips curled into something resembling a smirk. It was easier this way. I stared at her, struggling to wrap my mind around how casually she admitted it. How long? I asked. Melissa shrugged. Months. Maybe longer. Months. She had been plotting this for months, playing the role of the devoted wife, all while waiting for the perfect moment to take me out. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. Lily, you poisoned your own daughter. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes, hesitation, maybe even guilt. She would have been fine, Melissa snapped. The dose was small. I needed her unconscious, not she cut herself off. Not dead. The words hung between us, unspoken but deafening. I took a step closer. You were going to leave her behind. Melissa's jaw tightened. She would have been better off without me. My blood boiled. That's the one thing you're right about. Melissa exhaled sharply, shaking her head. You're wasting time, James. You should be thanking me. I laughed. I actually laughed. It was hollow, empty, filled with nothing but exhaustion and disbelief. Thanking you. She lifted her chin. You were never going to leave me, no matter how miserable we were. So I made the choice for both of us. I stared at her, disgust crawling over my skin like insects. You're a monster. Melissa's face twisted with irritation, like she was tired of pretending. Oh, please. I did what I had to do. I found someone who actually loves me. Someone who sees me for who I am. I took another step forward. And who was that, Melissa? A murderer? A liar? A coward? Her eyes flashed with something dark. You don't get to judge me, James, she hissed. You were just a stepping stone. A means to an end. A safety net until I was ready for something better. The word stung, but I wouldn't let her see it. Instead, I tilted my head. Something better, huh? So where is he? Melissa hesitated. I chuckled, shaking my head. Let me guess. He was supposed to be waiting for you. But he's not, is he? Her fingers tightened around her phone. She hadn't heard from him since the police siren started. Looks like your boyfriend isn't as committed as you thought, I said, watching the cracks form in her confidence. Maybe he realized what you really are. She opened her mouth to fire back, but before she could, the front door slammed open. Police. Hands up. Melissa spun just as officers flooded the room, their weapons drawn, their voices commanding. She made a move toward me, maybe to use me as a shield, maybe to grab something, but it didn't matter. Before she could take another step, 2 officers tackled her to the ground. She screamed, thrashing, kicking, cursing. Get off me. You don't understand. He's lying. He's lying. But the officers weren't listening. They snapped cuffs around her wrists, pinning her down as she fought against them. I stood frozen, watching the woman I once loved, the woman I had built a life with, being dragged to her feet, her eyes wild with rage and desperation. She locked eyes with me one last time. This isn't over, James. My jaw clenched. Oh, it is, I said. It's over for you. Melissa screamed as they hauled her outside, her shouts echoing through the house. And just like that, she was gone. The weight of everything crashed over me at once. I staggered, gripping the counter for support as the adrenaline drained from my body. My knees buckled, but strong hands caught me before I hit the floor. Sir, stay with me. We've got medics on the way. I nodded weakly, barely able to keep my eyes open. Then, a thought. Lily, where's my daughter? I croaked. She's stable, an officer reassured me. She's going to be okay. Relief unlike anything I'd ever felt washed over me. Melissa was gone. Lily was safe. And somehow, against all odds, I was still standing. But as I sat there, gasping for breath, one thought nagged at the back of my mind. If Melissa had been planning this for months, how much did I really know about the man she had planned to run away with? And more importantly, was he still out there? The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of the monitor beside me. My body still felt sluggish, but the 4 fluids had flushed out most of the poison. I turned my head toward the bed next to mine, where Lily lay asleep, her small chest rising and falling steadily. Seeing her like that, so fragile, so unaware of how close we had come to losing everything, made my blood boil all over again. Melissa had done this, and I needed to know why. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. 2 detectives stepped inside, their expressions unreadable. The older of the 2, a man in his 50s with graying hair and tired eyes, gave me a nod. "Mr. Carter, I'm Detective Harris. This is my partner, Detective Moore." I pushed myself up, wincing at the stiffness in my limbs. "You have news." Harris exchanged a glance with Moore before pulling out a folder. "Melissa Carter isn't the first woman to try something like this." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Moore flipped open the folder and slid a photograph toward me. "This is William Sloan." I stared at the picture. The man looked ordinary, sharp suit, slick back hair, the kind of guy you'd pass on the street without a second glance. "This is the man Melissa was planning to run away with," Moore continued. "But he's not just some boyfriend. He's a career con artist, Mr. Carter. And he's done this before." My fingers tightened around the edge of the hospital blanket. Harris took over. "We believe Sloan seduces women in unhappy marriages, convinces them to steal from their husbands, and then leaves them high and dry once the job is done." I felt my pulse quicken. "So you're saying he never intended to run away with her?" Harris confirmed. "Your wife was just another pawn in his game." The room felt smaller, suffocating. Melissa had thrown everything away for this man, her family, her life, even her own daughter, and he had never cared about her in the first place. I exhaled sharply, my mind racing. "Where is he now?" Moore shook her head. "That's the problem. As soon as the police showed up at your house, he disappeared. We have reason to believe he's still in the country, but we don't know for how long." I clenched my jaw. "And the money?" Harris hesitated before handing me another document. "Your wife made multiple transfers over the past 6 months. Small amounts at first, but they added up. She drained nearly every account in your name, including Lily's college fund." I gritted my teeth. "How much?" "Over $600,000. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me. I had worked for years, built a future, secured a home for my family, and she had wiped it all out without a second thought. Moore continued. "She also booked 2 one-way tickets to Argentina under fake names. The plan was to disappear." I let out a slow breath, my hands shaking with anger. I had spent years believing in Melissa, trusting her, loving her. And all the while, she had been waiting for the perfect moment to destroy me. "Does she know?" I asked quietly. Moore frowned. "Know what?" "That she was never going to Argentina. That she was nothing more than a stepping stone for him." Harris hesitated. "We haven't told her yet." I leaned back, exhaustion settling in. "Good. Let her sit in that cell thinking she won." There was silence for a moment. Then Moore asked, "Mr. Carter, do you have any idea why Sloan targeted you specifically?" I thought back, searching for any connection, any detail that would explain why my family had been chosen. Then something clicked. A business deal from 2 years ago. I had been in negotiations with a small investment firm for a merger, but at the last minute, I pulled out. The numbers hadn't added up, and something felt off. That firm had collapsed a year later, exposed for fraud. My eyes snapped up. "It's not random." Moore leaned forward. "Go on." I swallowed hard. 2 years ago, I almost invested in a fraudulent company. When I backed out, they went under. Harris exchanged a look with his partner. "And you think Sloan was involved?" I nodded slowly. "If he lost money because of me, this wasn't just about Melissa. It was personal." Moore scribbled something in her notebook. "That changes things. If this was revenge, he's not done with you yet." A chill ran down my spine. Melissa was in jail. The money was gone. But the man who had orchestrated everything? He was still out there. And something told me he wasn't finished. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, the air thick with whispers and anticipation. I sat in the front row, my hands clenched into fists on my lap. The past few weeks had been a blur of legal meetings, statements, and late nights spent replaying every moment of my life with Melissa, wondering how I had missed the truth. Now, the trial had begun. Melissa sat at the defendant's table, her once pristine appearance replaced with a dull prison jumpsuit. Her blonde hair was no longer perfectly styled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She barely acknowledged me as she stared straight ahead, her posture stiff, her lips pressed into a thin line. I wasn't sure if it was shame, fear, or sheer arrogance keeping her from looking at me. The judge entered, and everyone stood. When we sat again, the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire Morton, wasted no time. Your Honor, the evidence against the defendant is overwhelming. Melissa Carter planned and executed an attempted murder with the intention of stealing over $600,000 from her husband and fleeing the country. But perhaps most chilling of all, she poisoned her own daughter in the process. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I felt my jaw tighten. No matter how many times I heard it, the thought of Lily lying limp, barely breathing, made my stomach turn. Melissa's lawyer, a man named Daniel Green, rose with a composed expression. Your Honor, my client maintains that she had no intention of harming her family. She was manipulated by an individual who is yet to be apprehended. She was a victim of deceit, just like Mr. Carter. I scoffed under my breath. A victim? Melissa had made her choices. She had poured the poison into our food with her own hands. She had watched as Lily and I collapsed. She had packed her bags and taken every penny we had. If she was a victim, she was only a victim of her own greed. The prosecution began presenting evidence. The hidden camera footage played on a large screen. Melissa, pacing the kitchen, carefully pouring the poison into the breakfast she had made with so much false tenderness. The jury watched in silent horror as the scene unfolded, ending with her whispering into the phone, "It's done. We'll be together soon." A sharp intake of breath came from the crowd. Even Melissa, for all her attempts to look indifferent, shifted uncomfortably. Then came the financial records, months of transactions draining our accounts, little by little, until there was almost nothing left. Claire Morton explained how Melissa had bought plane tickets under a false identity, booked a rental home in Argentina, and made arrangements for a new life, all while I had been sleeping next to her every night, believing we were a family. The worst part came when they revealed how long she had been planning this. Based on our investigation, Melissa Carter's communication with her accomplice, William Sloan, dates back nearly 3 years. From the moment she met him, she was working against her own husband. Their messages, retrieved after a forensic search of her deleted accounts, show explicit plans to dispose of Mr. Carter and their daughter for financial gain. 3 years. That meant that for nearly a third of our marriage, she had been pretending, kissing me, laughing with me, celebrating anniversaries, all while secretly waiting for the moment she could destroy me. I gripped the armrest of the bench, feeling sick. Then came the defense's turn. Green tried everything, arguing that Melissa had been manipulated, that Sloan had pressured her into the crime, that she had second thoughts but was too afraid to back out. But the evidence was too strong. Her voice was on the recordings. Her transactions were traced. The camera had captured her calmly packing her things as I lay motionless on the floor. And then, the final blow. The lead detective, Harris, took the stand. We have confirmed that William Sloan has vanished. Despite a nationwide search, he appears to have left no trace. We believe he never intended to follow through on his promises to Melissa Carter. For the first time, Melissa's mask cracked. Her hands twitched. Her shoulders stiffened. She turned toward me then, her gaze locking onto mine, and for the first time since that morning in our kitchen, I saw real fear in her eyes. Sloan was gone. He had used her just as she had used me. Now, she was alone. Her lawyer tried to argue for a plea deal, but the prosecution refused. They had her on too many charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, financial fraud. The judge denied bail. The trial dragged on for days, but the outcome was inevitable. By the time the jury left to deliberate, I already knew what they would decide. 36 hours later, the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. Melissa inhaled sharply, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, she had lost control. The judge handed down the sentence: life in prison without parole. The courtroom buzzed with reactions, but I barely heard them. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was over. Melissa was going to prison. But as I sat there, listening to the gavel strike the bench, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. Sloan was still out there. And something told me he wasn't finished. The house felt emptier than ever. The same walls that once echoed with laughter and warmth now stood in silence, holding the memories of a life that had been nothing but an illusion. The trial was over. Melissa was behind bars. And yet, as I sat in the kitchen where it had all happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. Lily stirred in her chair, pushing around the last few bites of her breakfast with a quiet, distant expression. She had been different since that day, more reserved, more cautious. Though she was young, she had seen enough to understand that her mother had tried to harm us. That kind of betrayal leaves a mark. "Hey, sweetheart," I said gently. "You okay?" She looked up at me, her hazel eyes, so much like Melissa's, yet so much softer, filled with something I couldn't quite place. "I'm okay, Daddy." She wasn't, not fully, but she was trying. And so was I. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Things are going to get better, I promise." She gave me a small nod and a ghost of a smile, then returned to her food. Life after Melissa's arrest had been a slow process of picking up the pieces. The money she had tried to steal was mostly recovered, but the damage went deeper than bank accounts. Trust wasn't something that could be refunded. I had taken time off work, focusing on Lily, making sure she felt safe. The media had briefly latched onto the case. Wife's murder plot foiled by husband's quick thinking. But eventually, they moved on, leaving me with nothing but the whispers of neighbors and the occasional sympathetic glance from strangers. For the first time in years, I was alone. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. That was until the letter arrived. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, as if each stroke had been carefully crafted. My gut twisted the moment I saw it, even before I unfolded the paper inside. Only 6 words were written. "This isn't over." A chill ran down my spine. My grip on the letter tightened as my pulse pounded in my ears. Melissa was in prison. She had no way to send this. Which meant Sloan. He was still out there. Still watching. I swallowed hard, my eyes scanning the street through the kitchen window. Nothing seemed out of place, but the ordinary had lost its comfort. I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope, exhaling slowly. No. I had fought too hard to protect my daughter, to survive. I refused to live in fear. Sloan wanted me to be afraid. He wanted me to look over my shoulder for the rest of my life. But I wasn't that man anymore. I had beaten Melissa. I had exposed her plan. I had saved my daughter. And if Sloan thought he could take what was left of my life, he was mistaken. I would be ready. Whatever came next, whatever he had planned, it wasn't over. But neither was I. If you enjoyed this thrilling story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping tales. What would you do if you were in James's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, sometimes, the real danger isn't the enemy you see, but the one still lurking in the shadows. Stay tuned for more.